Wide angle or wide overview is always preferable to a detailed view of a single element, by Ciro Discepolo. Someone will probably think that I have made a mistake and that this example should have been part of a book dedicated exclusively to the timing of events. In my view, however, it fits perfectly here, although I'm particularly fascinated by the subject of timing events, and have been working for a long time on a software project so ambitious that it has this very subject as its main goal. Personally, I am convinced that it is necessary to try to illustrate in this book, before anything else, how fundamental it is to live in close synergy with symbols. In fact, if we know how to read them, symbols to which the magnificent opening couplet by Umberto Galimberti is dedicated can be the framework and perhaps even the precise screenplay of our lives in every smallest detail. If we accept this axiom, we must also accept that past, present, and future are nothing more than our mental constructions, and that time can be read as a single dimension, as a single uninterrupted flow of events linked and merged together by the symbol. This is why in more than one chapter of this volume I have referred to my personal approach to symbols and to apparently private facts, which seem indispensable to clarify how I personally intend to explain my point of view on their wise use. A recent episode in my life involves the sale of a property, not only mine, in order to proceed with significant renovation work on the house where I live. As these were radical works, the amount in question was quite high, requiring precisely the sale of a second property. At the beginning of June, I gave a mandate to a real estate agency and gathered the first impressions from professionals, acquaintances, friends, and relatives. The almost unanimous chorus of opinions indicated the impossibility of such a sale, as it was a house of great value and therefore very difficult to place on the real estate market, or alternatively a sale conceivable over 3 years, and at an estimated price of half the amount I requested. For my part, after carefully studying my stars, transits, solar return, and upcoming lunar returns, and those of my close family members, I concluded that the sale would take place within 20 days after my birthday, starting, that is, from July 17th, 2006. I was so convinced of my assessment, because the chorus of astral references was absolute in that sense, that, without saying a word to anyone, I cancelled a reservation for my summer holiday in Boston and booked a stay in a resort on the Sorrento Peninsula so that I could be reachable by a probable buyer within a few hours. In the meantime, I also began a loan application at a bank, but recommended that the mortgage should not be granted to me before September. To the branch manager I spoke to, I specified, "At the moment I don't have a buyer, but I am almost certain that I will sell by early August." Just as a matter of curiosity, I will say that this prediction was official on my part, and I shared it with the real estate agent, relatives, and friends. This financing process was necessary because in the meantime I had set in motion a war machine that could not be stopped. The rental of a small apartment to move into with my family for 6 to 12 months during the works, the signing of the moving contract with the transporter for the date of September 1st, 2006, the mandate to the construction company to start the renovation work strictly on September 4th, the mandate to 2 architects to draw up the executive project and supervise the works, and 100 other things that I will spare you. More than one person among relatives and acquaintances was concerned at that time about my temerity, which bordered on madness, as I had embarked on a truly risky adventure on a financial level, and consequently on a psychological one. But how could we explain to those who ignore the validity of astrology that one cannot ignore the reading of the stars in the small as well as in the greatest projects of a lifetime? And how could we explain, even to a colleague, that astrology is not only useful for sketching a character, but is pure truth, absolute truth, where if we are not already victims of premature senescence or alarming myopia, we will certainly be able to read such a reality. So from the beginning of June, I placed myself, so to speak, in observation of the situation, in full relaxation, I could swear to it, because I am convinced that the symbol is so strong that it cannot be stopped by any force in the world. The matter interested me enormously, both as a man, my financial peace of mind was at stake, and as an astrologer. The bet with myself was of the all-or-nothing type, and above all it was of the without a safety net type. Either I was spot on or I was completely wrong. In my view, I would win the bet, but not with a wide margin of error, but rather with tight precision. As you will read shortly, I did not think there were alternatives. At the center of the prediction were my transits and two aimed solar returns, RSM, that were supposed to work in unison. When I made my careful study, however, I examined the stars of the whole family, even going so far as to examine in detail the stars of deceased or less close relatives compared to my wife and daughters. In my solar return, SR 2005-2006, erected for Muscat in Oman, a beautiful Venus stood out on the Imum Coeli, Fondo del Cielo. In my case, I could almost swear by my birth time, which has been subjected to thousands upon thousands of verifications that were never contradicted. In the third case, that Venus had already acted abundantly in the past, besides the publication of a book I consider important, I Fondamenti dell'Astrologia Medica, Armenia, a rather peculiar event had occurred. A Hungarian reader of mine had attempted to have one of my texts published in Budapest and had succeeded, despite the fact that I usually place malefic planets in the third and ninth case of my solar returns. Now that Venus had to act in the fourth case as well, and I was trying to sell a house. Jupiter had been transiting my fourth case for a long time and would leave it around mid-August, and was it possible that it would not want to take the opportunity and decide to move into the fifth case, only to let me sell the property in the following months or years? If this were true, I told myself, then it would really mean that symbols are just water, nothingness, as some skeptical minds believe. But symbols are not water, and I could not doubt for a single moment that the combination of Venus in the fourth case of the RS and transiting Jupiter in the fourth would not produce the desired effect. Of course, I might not have sold the property at all, but how would the other trances, both mine and my family's, have been explained then? No, in my view, this was impossible. To this was added, in the new SR erected for Petropavlovsk, Kamchatka, Venus was in the eighth case. How could an extra flow of money be explained if not through a real estate sale? The most meaningful days in a year, both positive and negative, are those around 20 days before and 20 days after the birthday. On August 10th, it would also be my brother's birthday, who was directly and indirectly interested in the sale. Venus would enter my second case, in transit, around mid-August. Several other family references confirmed all this. These astral positions relative to transits and solar and lunar returns, if read individually, could have meant something else, but read within a precise, even if only hypothesized path, They had one and only one meaning. The fact remains that until the morning of August 1st, I had no buyers, not even potential ones. This was what appeared externally. I was preparing to leave for the holidays the following morning, and had not even planned any major expedients to facilitate potential contacts. On the contrary, probably for the first time in my life, I decided to leave the phone disconnected and not even put on the answering machine. In practice, I was about to leave and would, in fact, have erected a barrier between myself and the world for a few weeks. However, firmly believing in the value of the symbol, whose power in my view is higher than that of the Hiroshima bomb, I was quite calm and preparing my bags. Also to be noted was the presence of Uranus in the fourth case, in the RSM of Siberia, a position I was counting on for one or more twists from a real estate point of view. Usually I am unable to answer the phone because I'm engaged in other activities that require all my attention. I listen to the answering machine every now and then, but there are several people who, not liking it, avoid leaving messages. Strangely, that afternoon I was in front of the computer and saw a call coming in. The ringer has been off for years. I answered, and so it happened. Some would say by pure chance that a gentleman made me a very particular purchase proposal, a kind of twist that I would never have imagined, and that I will not explain to you, as these are technical legal details not essential to understanding what I'm trying to explain. A proposal that opened a negotiation which, however, seemed destined to fail. A few days later, on August 4th at 1822, a new lunar return ALR began for me with Jupiter at a medium coeli and with a moon exactly conjunct my radix Jupiter. At that point, but only at that point, I decided to push the matter slightly, but always in the vein of active astrology, and made a phone call to the gentleman mentioned above. According to real estate market experts, I should never have made that call, but I made it because the stars advised me to do so. At that precise moment, we agreed on the sale, and the following Monday, August 7th, exactly at the transition between 20 and 21 days from my birthday, I received an advance as a deposit, a check that would be usable about a week later. On that occasion, I also learned that the buyer had decided on the purchase on July 14th, and the proof lies in the fact that while I was in Siberia, he went to my brother for an official request, followed also by a letter. Personally, I respect all schools of astrology, none excluded, but I'm also firmly convinced that if an astrologer is unable to plan a prediction of this kind, then perhaps they are not even an astrologer in the strict sense of the term. Excerpted from the book L'interpretazione del tema natale by Ciro Discepolo,